is our 1989 Canal boat. After taking it out of the water, bringing it to our unit, we realised we made a bit of a mistake, and that was we didn't get it surveyed. The reason that's a problem is narrow boats are traditionally made of steel, and if they haven't been looked after, they can rust, and that leads to holes, and that means your boat might end up sinking. And that's especially important on a boat like this because this is a Springer and they're known for their thin steel. And if the steel is too thin, that basically means we've got a big old chunk of scrap and the project will come to an end. Before we show you how we're going to inspect our hull, we've got a little bit of work to do inside. We're going to jump straight in to attacking this floor, which means to pull up all the old ply. Before we move any of the floor, we've got a tank full of water at the back, so we need to drain that down. So I'm going to use the original pump that's already attached. We're going to put some temporary power to it. We're going to pump it into these and get rid of all the water.
This could take some time. The tank is empty. Now we're going to remove the pipes and take it out.
By our estimations, this tank was 300 litres, which means it weighed 300 kilograms. So it definitely had to be emptied before we moved it. So once it was all drained out, we got that pulled out and it was onto the floor. And as we pulled up the layers, we realised it had quite a few repairs. So rather than pull up the original, the previous owner had just been putting timber over the top, which isn't ideal. Timber gone, now it was time for the water. We've pumped most of the water out now. Obviously there is quite a bit of rubbish in the bottom and we need to inspect the metal underneath. But there is another issue. The iron or the metalwork that's used for the floor, as you can see, Captain Butcher has cut chunks of it out. Some of the reinforcements not attached, so we're actually going to cut all these out and replace them. And because the original install wasn't very good, this job didn't take long at all. I used the grinder to cut the two ends, and then a little kick broke off the weld in the middle. And if it was done correctly, that shouldn't have happened. Waste not, want not, that's what I say. We get the most out of our grinding disc. Well, this is a cutting disc. And look at these welds, they're lovely. Oh, this one's showing off. New disc installed, and we could get on with cutting out the last of the angle iron. So the steel we're removing is 5mm, we just measured with a tape, and it's 50 by 50. So that is exactly what we're going to put back. The purpose of these angle irons is to pick up the floor above. So even though we're cutting them out, the plan is to eventually reinstall them, but this time all new.
That is all the L iron up, and I want one thing from you guys. 75% of you that are watching you right now are not subscribed to the channel. We're trying to hit 1 million subscribers, and with your help, hitting that little button, we might just get there.
This is what we're aiming for, so we've cleaned it completely out, give it a wipe down and took any of the loose rust off. So we just need to do this same thing about 10 more times. And we accomplished that with a combination of a scraper, a stiff broom and some cloths. Once it was all cleaned up, we give it a nice little hoover. We got about halfway and realised there's a better tool for the job. As we're making our way through the boat, making everything lovely and new, bit by bit, we have a question for you guys. So we're in two minds, whether, one, we put the boat up for sale at the end once it's all finished, and believe me, it's going to be special, or two, do we put it up for a raffle and give you guys a chance to win it? So let us know in the comments below. We've upgraded our scraper, that was a bit too small.
Yes.
Get all this loose. If you're going to tackle this job yourself, I highly recommend this big scraper. You can get them at any hardware stores. I'm sure it made the job about 100 times quicker and done just as good a job as the smaller one. All scraped, all cleaned, that's the floor ready. That's all the floor up and gone. As you can see, the hole or the bottom section has now dried out. So we are going to be measuring the thickness of this steel down here before we do any more work on this boat. As we've gone along, we've been learning more and more about the different names for different sections of the boat. And I think I'm correct in saying this part here is actually the bilge. Now that we've cleaned up back to the metal, we can use this device. So this is an ultrasonic measuring device, so it's going to tell us how thick the metal is. And we do it by sitting that down. We're going to add some lubrication to the end of this little probe, and then we touch it onto the steel that's exposed. This tool here is not super expensive. I believe it's about £110. We will list it if you want to have a look, but it is so important. It means, are we going to carry on or are we not? So we get on with testing the whole boat. That's one section tested, but we do need to do it through the whole boat. We don't know the specific testing requirements, but in our heads, we did 2 sections in each bay on the floor, and that's going to give us a pretty good idea of whether our steel is going to make it or not.
The floor needs a little bit more work, but we're going to come back to that because today we're going to be insulating the boat.
So obviously there are many options when it comes to insulation, but after going through your comments, we've actually picked spray foam insulation. We haven't picked any old spray foam. We have picked Isofane Durafirm because it's one of the best and it's also closed cell. Like us, you may think that spray foam is pretty much identical across the board, but as we learnt from the guys that are going to be installing this, there's actually many different types. And the one we're using, closed cell, is very good for preventing any moisture getting through the insulation and hitting the steel on our boat, which then leads to condensation and, of course, rust. What the guys are doing now is they're applying tape to all of our battens and also the frames. The reason they're doing that is when we come to removing all this tape, we haven't got hardly any cleanup, so we're ready to pretty much put on our walls. At the end of the spray foam installation, you will see that the extra time spent preparing by taping all of our timbers is worth it because it saves so much cleanup at the end of the job. With this type of spray insulation, you do need a bit of ventilation. So we're putting in this pipe, and they're also going to have a fresh feed going into the soup. Everything's taped up, all of our ventilation is ready to rock. All that's left now is to get on with the insulation itself. The heater is on in the boat just to make sure there's no condensation. While that's heating up, I want to introduce you to John, Brad and Grant, because these guys are the ones that are actually going to be spray foaming our boat, and they are from Foam Insulations. Like many of you guys, I'm sure, I thought that spray insulation was pretty much spray it on the wall and walk away. But after meeting these guys and talking to them, there's actually a lot more to it. So with the spray insulation running and ready to go, they get on with spraying our boat. And the way these guys do it is super, super neat. And the reason that's important is the cleanup is always the worst. And because they're so tidy, we had minimum cleanup. Last time we showed you the boys' side of the titanium toilets, but apparently people want to see what the other side's like. So let me check. Hello, room service. Yeah, all clear. So I've got a separate side for the girls because apparently boys are dirty. So 3 girls' toilets. Looks a mess in here. You girls need to sort yourselves out.
Why is that one closed?
You don't want to know. Hello? Oh no, it's all good. We got lucky. We got lucky. So if you want anything like this, make sure you go and check out my titanium. Back to the spray foam action. So a couple of random facts that we picked up as these guys were talking to us. You don't actually go caking on your spray insulation onto a different material like our metal, because that can cause thermal shock and you might not get the bonding that you want. So they actually do a light mist coat, allow that to stick, and that's basically like a primer. So then they build up the layers. That's what you're seeing them do. So they put a thin layer on and then they build up our layers. And because it's closed cell, it doesn't expand like an open cell foam. So we've had the extraction on for a few hours while we all went and ate some food, and we are back ready to start scraping back all of these little sections that we taped, and that will be the foam finished. When it comes to the spray foam itself, we couldn't help because obviously you need to be suited with air ventilation going into your suit. But this part, we can help with. So it's just a case of pulling off that tape. Now you're going to see all of that preparation at the beginning is saving us so much time because it's all just pretty much pulling off. And any bits around the windows that are a bit too overfilled, we could just use a handsaw or a knife and cut back. And that is our boat, fully insulated. And that means our boat should last for many, many, many years to come. Foam is complete. Big shout out to these guys, Foam Insulations, for completing the job. It looks amazing. So these guys will do boats, metal containers, even warehouses like we're in right here, because this is great for removing condensation. So if you want to find out more, check out their link. It'll be in the description below. That's the spray foam done inside. Now we need to take a look at some of this. So these handrails have got a few holes in the bottom. So that means we are going to need to repair them. Which brings us here to Artec welding equipment. So the reason we're here, the guys have hooked us up with a MiG 181. We have no idea what that means, but apparently it's pretty much idiot proof, which is good for us because we have never welded. The guys at Artec Welding Equipment offered very kindly to give us a few basics at their shop. So we got our welder set up with some 0.8mm wire. So there's a few different options, but 0.8 is what we had before putting on the gun itself and getting the machine fired up.
Don't look like a welder.
No, you don't. So if Brad's suited and booted and me suited and booted, the guys show us how easy it is to set up this machine, and truly it is super simple. You put in your wire size and your material size.
Now that they've shown us the basics, we've got to try and actually do this. If I mess this up, I'm Phil. You don't know what one it is. I'm Phil.
First up was Phil, aka Brad.
Now it's Brad's go. What an idiot.
Then it was my turn, and lucky for us, Dom and Joe had done a good job at teaching us the basics and putting up with Brad. So they showed us a few different techniques, welding up, filling holes, and even the basic weld.
We're gonna fill the hole. We're gonna fill the hole. And if it's rubbish, I'm Phil.
We both did pretty well, which is testament to how easy this welder was to use.
I made a pretty flower.
Joe then offered to show us how to do a little bit of stick welding, and my lord, this is very difficult. Now that we're still not professional welders, let's get back to the boat. And we're back. Before we look at any more of the repairs, remember when we removed all of this lot? Well, now we need to get rid of it. But the reason we've waited so long is we need Dan and the A-team to weigh it for us.
So before we put this in the skip, we actually want to guess between everyone how much this weighs. So, Rob, what do you think?
1.7.
Phil?
1.3.
Dan?
1.5.
James?
1.2.
Mike?
1.5.
Dan's cheating. Dan said 920 kilograms. So that's his guess.
It's in 960.
What are we locking Dan's in at?
960.
960 it is, let's get it loaded.
After catching Dan trying to cheat, we locked him in at 960 and got the skip loaded, ready for the weighbridge. James has finished loading our skip up. So now let's cut to James at the weighbridge. Unfortunately, James has just called us and the weighbridge is closed. But don't worry, we're going to let you know in the next episode. So if you do want to have a guess until then, make sure you put it down in the comments. Chris, you going to have a guess on the pile?
How much that weighs?
Yeah, on the pile.
I'm struggling with that.
At least have a try.
3 ton.
3 tonne for Chris. Next up on Operation Renovation is the engine bay, and as you can see, this is going to take a little bit more than a few wipes with a cloth. And that's why we've got the ice blasters. So these guys normally do supercars like you may have seen on Matt Armstrong's channel and even Chris Slicks's channel, but now they're doing super boats.
I wouldn't call it a super boat.
It is shut up, it is super boat.
No one likes negativity, Brad. It's definitely a super boat. So the ice blasters pulled up and start to roll out their generator, which is actually a large compressor, and also all of the ice machines they're going to be using to clean up our engine bay.
So they're called slugs, so if it pops off while someone's close, it ain't going to damage no one.
And no one wants to get hit in the leg by a high pressure hose, do they?
While the guys are setting up R2 and D2, make sure you subscribe because we are aiming for that 1 million mark and we're so close.
While the lads finished setting up their machines, we jumped into the engine bay because we needed to clean up the last of all the loose grit and of course the last little bit of water in the bottom.
We're just going around clearing up all the debris off the boat, so when the ice blast it don't go everywhere.
Because the system is basically dry ice and also of course high pressured air. So that air coming in would just eventually blast all of that grit all around, and no one wants that.
We are very professional at the Home Improvements channel. I want to ask these two what they think of our professional lighting system.
I think
Very professional.
MGM Studios level.
That's what I'm saying. Do you think we should show you how lighting 2 broomsticks, 2 UD lights and a big ladder?
Does the job.
Let's do some dry icing.
After impressing Joe and Mark with our lighting setup, they got on with loading up a bucket full of the dry ice. That is then put into one of the 2 machines that they're going to be using to blast our engine bay.
Now we're going to set you up and film what happens. You ain't going to be able to listen because it is very loud.
Obviously there is air blasting at high pressure, so it is quite loud, but it was very nice to watch. So we watched them slowly cleaning off all of the grit and grime that had built up over about 30 plus years on this boat, because I have a suspicion this thing has never been cleaned.
That ice blasting, as he's going round and he's stripping the paint off, it's looking really satisfying. I hope you enjoyed it anyway.
Dry ice blasting is not to be confused with sand blasting. The reason we didn't go with sand blasting in here and we went with this much more delicate process is we didn't want all of the grit to get stuck in the engine bay.
We're halfway through blasting the engine bay, but look who has just turned up to come and inspect. Chris is back. So while he is here, we're going to ask the ice blasters if we can have a little go. I want to try it. Yes mate, is it alright if we have a go? Go for it. We'll get
We've only got permission.
Permission granted from the grown-ups. Me and Chris have a little go at blasting some of that algae off the side.
If I had one of these, I'd never put it down. I'd clean everything.
Once me and Chris had a little play, Mark showed us how it was really done.
We've cleaned the top half and we've blasted it all into the centre. We're going to clean it now with a vacuum and then crack on with the second half.
Because this had popped some loose paint off, it was always better to get a bit on the floor and then hoover it back up and go again. That way there was less mess. So I'm just going to sit back and let you enjoy the process.
That's the ice blasting complete. They are about to hit the road. If you do want any ice blasting, the link will be in the description. They do automotive, industrial, and of course, marine.
Before we treat our hull, what we're going to be doing is using this. This is actually a tile bit, so we've come up with this little idea to remove the scowl. So this is just a bit of loose scowl before we start to treat it with the converter. So just like that, look, we've removed, so that's just a loose bit of scowl from the rust, and that is going to be solid underneath. and then we can use the rust converter. And talking about rust converters, don't forget all of the stuff we use, including that rust converter, is in the description below. I then got on with grinding or breaking off all of those loose bits of scale. I went over the whole thing. I'm not trying to break right into the metal. We're just skimming over the top to take all of that loose stuff off. And it was time for another little vacuum.
That is the boat, all nice and hoovered. I'm just going to run around with a cloth and a bit of brake cleaner just to get any of the excess dust off inside the bilge, I think it's called.
This step's super important because you need the paint to fully adhere to the metal underneath.
Now that everything is cleaned, all of the loose rust is gone, we're now going to be using Genelite rust converter. So basically that's going to convert any rust that's left in the floor. So we're going to go through, switch on our ventilation, put our mask on and get the rest of this sprayed. Well, mainly Chris.
This stuff is awesome because it's in a spray can. It's going to get you into spaces that you can't normally reach with a brush or a roller. So me and Chris get on with giving the whole floor a coat with the converter, and then Brad pops in for about 3 milliseconds trying to take all of the glory.
Shake vigorously.
How long for?
That's like shake gently.
I've got...
So we've done the converter. So this stuff actually kills rust as well, but it also primes. So it's like double protection. So hopefully it's going to be lovely.
What are we using it for?
We're using the spray one because obviously, look, you see like this, that's going to be a nightmare with roller. So if we use this into the corner like that, then we've got our roller like that.
Every step of this, make sure you're wearing a mask and you've got good ventilation.
Before we put this paint on, Chris has spent his Saturday, while it's been the only sunny day in England, painting our narrowboat. What could you have been doing today, Chris?
I could have been out on my jet ski,
You could have been out on his jet ski.
fishing.
But what are you doing?
I'm painting a narrowboat.
What a fellow guy.
Yeah, I think people need to put a comment down below for Chris.
A nice one.
Nice one.
Before we start painting on the main coat, so that is this here, I'll just show you exactly what we've done. So we chiseled off all the loose stuff, you see us do that. Then the Genelite rust converter, so that converts any rust. Then we went with a spray primer, so it also kills rust. We're all about this rust, you know. Now, this is the same product, so it's still an anti-rust primer, except now we're going to be rolling it on. And like we said in the last video, get a lot of roller sleeves because this stuff kills the rollers.
Well, in the last video you would have seen us rolling the walls and these foam rollers disintegrate. But lucky for us, Chris had been reading the comments and remembered one of you had said about using the fluffy rollers. So I should have remembered reading that.
Chris read the comments and
Chris read them, I also read them, but I ignored it because I actually forgot. And he was like, use the fluffy rollers because someone said they last longer. Well, fact, it does last longer.
In fact, one each lasted for the whole floor and they were still going. Right, we're midway through painting. We need to stop because I've just come out with a classic dad joke. So big shout out to my mate Sam because he's just a dad joke king. But I know the last 4 words of every single Elvis Presley song.
do you know what it is?
Don't say it, don't say it.
Phil knows.
If you know the answer, I'll put it in the comments. Dad joke over, it was time to finish putting the first coat on the bilge. Right, this is a typical man thing, this is. So the phone stand is in Chris's way. So he's like, I could move it, or I could paint around it.
Just paint it
Look,
around.
even here, look, he was like, I don't want to get paint on it, so I'll just paint around it. Paint around.
Not your job.
No, not my job. To be fair to Chris, he was more concerned about the filming, not just trying to paint around things. So we got that stand moved and finally filled in the last of that little section with the red primer from Genelite. The main thing you want to do when applying this stuff is make sure you get full coverage. Even though you're doing 2 coats, it's nice to know that you've got a thick layer over the whole floor.
That's the floor painted. We are going to do another coat, but we'll do that once that one dries. And unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in this video. But make sure you catch us on the next one. I will see you later. Do Brad's bit quick. Do Brad's bit.
Before we get there though, you want me to come back and do another coat?
Yes.
Okay, love you, bye.
The reason we're at Artec kills me, man. What's the matter?